Welcome to the deep dive. You know that feeling, right? That intense need to quickly grasp a ton of information for a big test without feeling totally swamped by details. Well, today our mission is to cut through the noise and give you your ultimate Unit 1 test survival guide for environmental science. We're going to pull out the most important concepts, maybe reveal some surprising connections, and just help you walk into that test feeling, prepared and genuinely informed. Environmental science, at its core, it explores this kind of fundamental tension in our world. I mean, consider this. I've traveled to places like Papua New Guinea, where life means grass huts, massive centipedes, and honestly, incredibly difficult travel conditions. It's a profound experience, for sure, but it's not exactly the lifestyle most of us are aiming for day to day. In our modern lives, we crave convenience, right? And we want it with the minimum possible impact on the environment. So how do we balance that desire for a comfortable life with the planet's finite resources? That question right there, that's the heart of environmental science.
Exactly. That anecdote really crystallizes the core challenge. We enjoy these immense benefits of modern society, but often the true environmental costs are kind of hidden or underestimated. So this deep dive into Unit 1, it's really more than just memorizing terms. It's about laying a foundational understanding. If you grasp these core concepts, you can start to connect the dots throughout your entire course, see Earth as this interconnected system, and really understand why this stuff matters.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our basic toolkit for environmental science, we have to start with how we even gather information. There's observing, which is simply reporting what you see, like, noting a crack in the earth or downed power lines after a tremor. You're just reporting the facts.
That's what you see.
Right. Then there's inferring. That's where you use your existing knowledge to explain those observations. So if you see that crack in the down lines, you might infer that an earthquake happened, drawing on what you know about, say, seismic activity.
Precisely. Observing is the direct, raw sensory input. Inferring is the interpretation, adding that layer of explanation. And this distinction, it leads us right into qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative data is descriptive. It relies on your senses, your lived experience, saying the air feels heavy and smells acrid after the wildfire. That's qualitative.
Okay, like a feeling or description.
Exactly. Whereas quantitative data, that involves numbers. Measuring the exact particulate matter in the air or counting the acres burned, that's quantitative. And environmental science uses both. Often those qualitative observations help you figure out where you need to take precise quantitative measurements.
That makes a lot of sense. So from individual observations, we scale up to understand systems. A system is basically just a set of interacting components that influence each other by exchanging energy or materials. I mean, even your own bedroom can be seen as a system, right? With interacting factors like temperature, air quality, maybe even the flow of food and waste in and out if you're messy.
Yeah.
The broader environment, then, is really the sum of all conditions around us that influence life. It's this massive, complex system.
And what's crucial to grasp here is that systems can be either open or closed. An open system, like Earth itself, exchanges both matter and energy with its surroundings. Think of solar radiation coming in and heat radiating back out.
Okay, stuff comes in, stuff goes out.
Right. But a closed system exchanges energy but keeps its matter contained. Mono Lake in Central California is a great example of a natural closed system. Stream water and dissolved salts flow in, but water only leaves through evaporation, which concentrates the salts over time. It really shows how these distinct natural systems can operate.
Okay, systems. Got it. Now here's where it gets really interesting for me. How changes within these systems can amplify or resist further change. We're talking feedback loops. And it's not about good or bad outcomes necessarily, but whether an initial change is encouraged or discouraged by the system itself.
Yeah, it's about the direction of the response.
So take positive feedback. This is where a change causes more of that same change to happen. It accelerates the process. The classic and honestly deeply concerning environmental example is permafrost thaw. As global temperatures rise, permafrost melts, releasing huge amounts of stored methane and CO2. These are powerful greenhouse gases.
Very powerful.
So they then further warm the planet, which in turn melts more permafrost, releasing more gases. It's this self-reinforcing, escalating cycle.
A dangerous spiral.
Exactly. Then we have negative feedback. This is where a change causes the initial process to slow down or stop, stabilizing the system. For instance, if global temperatures increase, more water evaporates, forming more clouds. These clouds then reflect more sunlight back into space, shading and cooling the Earth, which in turn slows the initial warming.
Like putting the brakes on.
Yeah, it's a natural counter-response, like your body sweating to cool down when you overheat.
And understanding these feedback loops is absolutely critical for predicting future environmental changes, especially with something as complex as climate change. The real danger with positive feedback loops isn't just that they amplify change, but that once you cross a certain threshold, they can become unstoppable self-reinforcing cycles. Human intervention becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible to reverse it.
Okay, wow. So let's shift gears a bit and dive into the fundamental laws governing matter and energy. This stuff is key. The first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservation of matter and energy. It basically states that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. They only change forms. Think about burning gasoline in your car. The exhaust actually weighs more than the gasoline itself because the carbon in the gas combined with oxygen from the air.
Right, it's transformed.
Or a burning log, it doesn't just vanish. Its mass transforms into ash, smoke, and gases released into the atmosphere. It all goes somewhere.
And this concept, while it seems obvious now, wasn't always understood. For a long, long time, people thought if you dumped waste into a river or buried it, it just disappeared. This misconception led to absolutely catastrophic historical pollution. Rivers like the Thames in London, the Seine in Paris, they became putrid sewers. This law makes it crystal clear. Everything goes somewhere. Nothing truly vanishes. It just transforms. Which really underscores why waste management and pollution prevention are so crucial.
Okay, so matter and energy are conserved. Now let's define energy as the ability to do work and power as the rate at which that work is done, how fast you use the energy. Energy comes in two main forms we need to know. Potential energy, which is stored energy like the chemical energy in that gasoline, or a person just standing at the top of a ski hill.
Waiting to be released.
Exactly. And kinetic energy, which is the energy of motion, that car driving or skiing down the hill. And temperature. That's a direct measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in something. Faster particle movement means higher temperature.
Yeah, that connection between temperature and kinetic energy is fundamental. It explains how energy flows, how heat moves. It's even why coastal areas often stay cooler than inland areas.
Yeah.
The ocean absorbs and distributes a huge amount of heat energy.
Right. And speaking of energy, there's energy quality. This is about how easily an energy source can be used for work. Liquid gasoline is considered high-quality energy because it's concentrated, easy to transport, and readily converts to kinetic energy in an engine. Electricity, too, carried efficiently through wires, is high quality.
Makes sense. Which brings us to entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. This is a big one. It states that in any isolated system, the natural tendency is always to move from order to disorder, from concentration to dispersal, increasing randomness.
It sounds complicated, but it's actually super intuitive, right?
Totally intuitive. Mountains erode into smaller pieces over time. A tidy room inevitably becomes messy. A spray of cologne diffuses throughout a space until you can barely smell it.
Chaos reigns.
Pretty much. This inherent drive towards disorder means that whenever energy is used or transformed, some of it is inevitably converted into a less useful, more dispersed form, usually heat. You can't get a 100% efficient energy conversion because of entropy.
Okay, quick mention before we move on. The basic building blocks of life, organic macromolecules, you'll see these terms. We have carbohydrates for energy storage, proteins made of amino acids for enzymes and structure, nucleic acids like DNA for genetic info, and lipids, fats, oils, waxes for cell membranes and energy storage. Just know, these are the fundamental bits that make up organisms. Chapter 2 covers them if you need a refresher. All right, let's shift to the core energy processes that sustain life itself. These are super important for the test. First, photosynthesis. This is how plants create their own food. The equation is basically 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus light energy yields C6H12O6, that's glucose, sugar, plus 6O2, oxygen.
So carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight.
Yep. Plants use solar energy to transform them into sugar, their food, and they release oxygen as a byproduct. It's the engine of life on Earth, really.
Absolutely fundamental.
The inverse process, equally vital, is cellular respiration. This is how organisms, plants included, but also us break down that sugar. The equation is the reverse. C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus energy, usually in the form of ATP.
ATP, the energy currency of the cell.
Exactly. This happens in our cell's mitochondria, the powerhouse. It's essentially like burning fuel, whether it's a log, gasoline in a car, or the food you eat using oxygen to release usable energy, producing carbon dioxide and water. Even decomposition involves respiration.
And that interconnectedness of photosynthesis and respiration, it's like Earth's fundamental breathing cycle, constantly exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen. It also highlights why CO2 is such a double-edged sword. Essential for plant life, yes, but in excess. That's where we run into problems. Historically, think about huge rainforests growing. They actually drew so much CO2 out of the atmosphere that they contributed to past ice ages.
Wow.
And conversely, human activities releasing way too much CO2 now are accelerating warming.
Okay, let's zoom out from the cellular level to the living world itself and talk about ecosystems. Simply put, these are specific locations on Earth where the living or biotic components like bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, even dead leaves interact with the non-living or abiotic parts, things like air, temperature, minerals, salinity, light, pH, soil, water, humidity.
All the living and non-living stuff in one place interacting.
Right. And crucially, ecosystems aren't usually isolated with hard boundaries. Think of a pond and the forest right next to it. They're intricately linked, depending heavily on each other.
That interdependency is the key insight. All biotic elements rely fundamentally on abiotic factors. Without enough water, the right temperature range, healthy soil, sunlight, life just can't thrive. It shows the delicate balance needed for an ecosystem to function.
Makes sense. Okay, within ecosystems, we see competition. This happens in two main forms. First, intraspecific competition. That's competition within the same species. Think two rams butting heads for mating rights, or even players on the same football team competing for a starting spot.
Fighting amongst themselves.
Then there's interspecific competition, which is between different species, like a lion taking down a buffalo, or maybe even a human fighting off a rattlesnake.
And that interspecific competition is a huge driver of natural selection. It shapes how species evolve and interact within communities, how they carve out their niches to use resources.
Okay, moving from competition to closer relationships. Symbiotic relationships.
Yeah.
These are close, long-term interactions between different species that usually don't involve one outright killing the other for food immediately. First is mutualism, where both species benefit. The classic example is the anemone protecting the clownfish from predators, and the clownfish may be cleaning the anemone or chasing away fish that eat it. Bees pollinating flowers while getting nectar is another one, win-win.
Both gain something.
Then there's commensalism. Here, one species benefits, and the other is pretty much unaffected, neither helped nor harmed. Think barnacles hitching a ride on a whale or a sea turtle. The barnacle gets a free ride and access to food particles the whale probably doesn't even notice. Or more fish sticking to sharks, same idea.
One benefits, the other's indifferent.
Finally, parasitism. One species, the parasite, benefits at the expense of the other, the host, which is harmed. Ticks on a dog, tapeworms inside an animal. Those are clear examples.
Right, and the key here is the host. Parasites generally don't want to kill their host quickly, or maybe ever, because they need the host to survive and reproduce, unlike predators.
Good point. So some blood feeders, like mosquitoes or vampire bats, they feed and leave, right? They can spread disease, but they aren't technically parasites living on or in the host long-term like a tapeworm.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay, from relationships, let's climb the trophic levels. These are basically the steps in a food chain or food web describing who eats whom. At the very bottom, level 1, are the producers, also called autotrophs. These are organisms that make their own food, usually through photosynthesis, so plants, algae, some bacteria.
The base of the food web.
Above them are the consumers, or heterotrophs, which get energy by eating other organisms. Primary consumers are herbivores, they eat the producers, think rabbits eating grass. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. They can be carnivores or omnivores, like a fox eating a rabbit. And tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, like an owl eating that fox. You can have quaternary levels, but it gets less common on tests.
Energy runs out quick.
Right. At the very top, we find apex predators. These are the predators at the top of their food chain with no natural predators themselves in that ecosystem. Locally, maybe a cougar or a golden eagle. Apex predators often function as keystone species. A keystone species is any organism, predator or not, that has a disproportionately large effect on its environment relative to its actual abundance.
Like the keystone in an arch, pull it out, and the whole thing can collapse.
Exactly. Removing an apex predator, like wolves, can cause deer or elk populations to explode, leading to overgrazing that devastates plant communities and affects everything else down the line. Reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone is a famous example of how bringing back a keystone species can restore balance.
But remember, not all keystone species are predators. Sometimes it can be a specific plant, or like sea otters controlling sea urchin populations that would otherwise destroy kelp forests.
Good point. Okay, below the predators, we also have scavengers. These are carnivores that consume animals that are already dead. Vultures are the classic example. They play a vital role in cleaning up carcasses and preventing the spread of disease. Sadly, things like lead from hunters' bullets biomagnify and arm them.
Very important cleanup crew. And then we have detritivores. These organisms, like earthworms or dung beetles, specialize in breaking down detritus, which is dead organic tissue, and waste products into smaller pieces. They ingest and digest it, moving things around, helping decomposition. Think dung beetles rolling away dung balls in Africa, aerating and fertilizing the soil as they go.
So they're like the physical breakdown crew.
Exactly. And the final, absolutely critical step is performed by decomposers. These are primarily bacteria and fungi, like mold growing on dead wood or bacteria in the soil. They don't just break stuff down physically, they chemically break down organic matter, recycling essential nutrients back into the ecosystem in forms that producers, the plants, can absorb and use again. They turn manure into usable fertilizer, essentially. Without decomposers, nutrients would stay locked up in dead stuff, and the whole system would grind to a halt.
Okay, so producers make the food, consumers eat, detritivores break down the chunks, and decomposers recycle the nutrients. Got it. So how does energy actually flow through all these trophic levels? This is governed by the 10% rule, sometimes called ecological efficiency. This is a really important concept for your test. It basically states that only about 10% of the energy consumed at one trophic level is actually converted into biomass and available to the next trophic level.
Only 10%?
Yeah, the other 90% is lost, primarily as heat through metabolic processes, or it's used for the organism's own life functions, or it ends up as waste.
This inefficiency has huge implications. It means you need a much larger biomass at lower trophic levels to support the levels above. It's why dandelions are everywhere, but seeing a bear is relatively rare. If the plants in an area capture, say, 10,000 joules of energy, the herbivores eating them might only incorporate about 1,000 joules into their bodies. The carnivores eating the herbivores get maybe 100 joules, and a tertiary consumer eating those carnivores might only get 10 joules.
That pyramid shape makes so much sense now. It also explains why eating lower on the food chain, like eating plants directly, is much more energy efficient from an ecosystem perspective than eating animals that ate plants.
Absolutely. There's a significant energy cost associated with meat production because of this rule. Animals respire a lot, move around, generate heat. That's all energy loss that doesn't become meat.
Okay, let's quantify this energy capture at the bottom. We talk about gross primary productivity, GPP. This is the total amount of solar energy that producers in an ecosystem capture via photosynthesis over a given amount of time. It's the total paycheck, if you will.
All the energy captured initially.
But plants need energy to live too, right? They respire. So the energy they use for their own respiration is subtracted from the GPP. What's left over is the net primary productivity, NPP. This is the energy actually stored as biomass, new leaves, stems, roots, that is available for growth and can be transferred to consumers. So the equation is simple. NPP equals GPPR, respiration. NTP is the plant's profit after covering its costs.
And NPP is really what determines how much life an ecosystem can support above the producer level.
So where do we find the highest productivity? Well, highest GPP tends to be in warm, sunny, rainy areas. Think southeastern US. Lots of energy capture potential. But here's a classic test question, often a trick question. Which ecosystems have the highest NPP? Per unit area, tropical rainforests are champions. They are incredibly productive in a small space. However, globally, the open oceans contribute the largest total amount of NPP. Why? Simply because they cover such a vast area of the planet. Even though their productivity per square meter is quite low compared to a rainforest, their sheer size adds up.
It's a volume versus density thing. Also highlights that massive organisms aren't always the most productive overall. A field of fast-growing grasses or phytoplankton might add more biomass collectively per day than the single giant slow-growing sequoia tree, even though the tree's individual biomass is huge.
That's a great point. It's about the rate of energy capture and storage. We see these concepts in action with things like the eco-column activity you might do in class, or dissecting owl pellets to see what trophic levels the owl consumed.
Those hands-on activities really bring GPP, NPP, and food webs to life.
Okay, let's shift our focus again now to the really big picture. Biogeochemical cycles. This sounds fancy, but it's just about the movements of essential matter elements found in life, bio, rocks, geo, and air water, chemical, through Earth's systems.
It emphasizes that Earth is one giant recycling system. Matter isn't lost, it just moves around through biological, geological, and chemical processes.
We'll hit the three major ones you need for Unit 1. First, the hydrologic cycle, or the water cycle. Most of this is probably familiar. Key processes: evaporation, Liquid to gas, driven by heat. Condensation, gas back to liquid, forming clouds or dew. Precipitation, water released from clouds, rain, snow, sleet, hail.
The basics.
Also, transpiration, this is a key one often forgotten. It's water vapor released from plant leaves. It's a huge part of water moving into the atmosphere, why greenhouses get so humid. And then runoff, water flowing over the land surface, and infiltration or percolation, where water soaks into the soil and rock to become groundwater.
Generally well understood, but don't underestimate the role of transpiration. The biological component is massive.
Okay, second major cycle, the carbon cycle. This is central to climate change discussions. Carbon exists in the atmosphere and dissolved in the ocean mainly as CO2. It's in living organisms, plants, animals, decomposers, stored over long timescales in fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, and sedimentary rocks like limestone. Volcanoes also release carbon.
It's everywhere.
Key processes moving it around. Photosynthesis takes CO2 out of the atmosphere and puts it into plants. Cellular respiration releases CO2 back into the atmosphere from plants, animals, and decomposers. Burning anything organic, wood, fossil fuels, also releases CO2 through combustion. There's gas exchange between the atmosphere and the oceans. CO2 dissolves in water, but warmer water holds less CO2, so warming oceans can release it. Sedimentation and burial turns dead organic matter and shells into fossil fuels or limestone over millions of years, locking carbon away.
A slow process.
Until humans come along with extraction, digging up fossil fuels, and massive combustion, rapidly releasing that stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Volcanoes also contribute naturally, releasing carbon from melted rock. The Keeling curve is the famous graph showing atmospheric CO2 levels measured in Hawaii since the 1950s. You need to know its features.
Definitely.
It shows two main things. First, a clear, undeniable overall upward trend. There's more CO2 in the atmosphere now than last year, and way more than in the 1950s. Second, it shows seasonal fluctuations, a sawtooth pattern. CO2 levels dip down in the northern hemisphere's spring and summer because plants are actively growing and pulling CO2 out of the air via photosynthesis. Then levels go back up in the fall and winter as plants die back and decomposition releases CO2.
That curve is probably the single most iconic piece of data in environmental science. It starkly illustrates human impact on a global cycle. Remember, CO2 itself isn't toxic to us at these atmospheric levels, and it's essential for plants, but the rate of increase is driving climate change because it traps heat.
Okay, now for the third cycle, and this is often the trickiest one for students. The nitrogen cycle. Why do we care? Well, about 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen gas, N2, but in that form, it's incredibly stable and unusable by most living organisms.
Triple bond, very hard to break.
Right, but we desperately need nitrogen. It's a crucial component of proteins, think muscles, hair, skin, enzymes, and nucleic acids like DNA. In many natural ecosystems, nitrogen is the limiting nutrient, meaning its scarcity restricts how much life can grow.
Plant growth often depends directly on available nitrogen.
So how does unusable N2 gas get turned into something life can use? This cycle is almost entirely driven by bacteria. Different types of bacteria handle each step. First step, nitrogen fixation. Special nitrogen-fixing bacteria, some living freely in soil or water, others in root nodules of legume plants like beans or clover, that's rhizobium bacteria, convert atmospheric N2 gas into ammonia, NH3, or ammonium NH4+, which are usable forms. Lightning can also fix a small amount of nitrogen.
Bacteria doing the heavy lifting.
Second step, ammonification. When organisms die or produce waste, decomposer bacteria break down the organic nitrogen in proteins and nucleic acids back into ammonium. Third step, nitrification. Other types of soil bacteria take that ammonium and convert it first into nitrate, NO2, and then into nitrate, NO3. Nitrate, the main form of nitrogen that most plants can easily absorb through their roots. It's basically natural fertilizer.
Plants love nitrate.
Fourth step, assimilation. This is simply plants absorbing that nitrate, or ammonium, through their roots and incorporating the nitrogen into their own tissues, making proteins, DNA, etc. Animals then get their nitrogen by eating the plants or by eating other animals. Fifth and final step, denitrification. Under anaerobic conditions, low oxygen, like in waterlogged soils or sediments, denitrifying bacteria convert nitrates back into nitrogen gas, N2, and nitrous oxide, N2O, a greenhouse gas, releasing it back into the atmosphere, completing the cycle.
So fixation brings it into the system, assimilation moves it through the food web, ammonification and nitrification convert forms within the soil, and denitrification sends it back to the air. It's intricate. And just like carbon, humans have massively interfered. While too little nitrogen limits growth in nature, our invention, the Haber-Bosch process to create synthetic ammonia fertilizers, means we now fix more nitrogen than all natural processes combined.
Wow.
Yeah. Runoff of excess fertilizer from farms into rivers and oceans leads to huge problems like eutrophication and harmful algal blooms, basically. Too much nitrogen in the wrong places, disrupting that natural balance.
Okay, that cycle is complex but crucial. Bacteria are the MVPs. Now, let's tie a lot of these Unit 1 concept systems, resources, human impact together with a real-world case study. Mono Lake. This is a fascinating place in Central California. It's an ancient terminal lake, meaning water flows in but not out, except through evaporation, formed about 760,000 years ago. Because of the evaporation, it's extremely salty, hypersaline, and alkaline.
Unique chemistry.
No fish can live there. But it supports billions of tiny brine shrimp and alkali flies. These tiny critters are a critical food source for millions of migratory birds, making Mono Lake a vital stopover point. You also see those weird, knobby tufa towers formed underwater when calcium-rich spring water reacted with the carbonate-rich lake water. The conflict. It goes back to the early 20th century and the infamous California water wars. Los Angeles, growing rapidly, needed water. William Mulholland engineered the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and starting in 1913, and especially after an extension in 1941, LA began diverting water from the streams that fed Mono Lake.
Taking the lake's inputs.
Exactly. As a result, the lake level plummeted by over 40 feet. The salinity doubled, threatening the brine, shrimp, and flies. Dust storms blew off the exposed lake bed, causing air pollution. The tufa towers were left high and dry. The resolution came through activism. Starting in 1974, a biologist named David Gaines and his students began raising awareness. This led to lawsuits. A landmark 1983 California Supreme Court case, National Audubon Society versus Superior Court, was key. It invoked the public trust doctrine.
Ancient legal concept.
Yeah, dating back to Roman Emperor Justinian. It basically says that certain natural resources like navigable waters, the air, the sea, and shores are held in trust by the state for the benefit of all people and can't just be given away for private use if it harms the public interest in those resources. The court ruled that LA's diversions, while permitted earlier, violated this public trust by harming the lake's ecological and aesthetic values. This forced a reevaluation.
A huge win for environmental law.
Ultimately, a state board issued orders to raise the lake level back to a sustainable point by reducing water diversions, protecting the ecosystem while still allowing LA some water. The lake is slowly recovering. And this case highlights classic trade-offs, doesn't it? The existence of modern Los Angeles, with all its economic activity, culture, the Lakers, Hollywood, whatever, was enabled in part by diverting that water. But it came at the cost of damaging this unique, ancient, natural ecosystem. It forces us to grapple with human well-being in its broadest sense. Does well-being only mean economic growth and urban convenience? Or does it also include the cultural and intrinsic benefits of nature? The beauty of mountains, the health of ecosystems, the spiritual connection people feel, the inspiration for art.
The value beyond dollars and cents.
Exactly. The public trust doctrine provides a legal framework to argue that those non-market values matter and deserve protection.
Which leads us perfectly into our final big concept for Unit 1, the tragedy of the commons, based on Garrett Hardin's famous 1968 essay. Hardin's core idea was that some major problems, particularly those involving shared resources, have no purely technical solution like inventing a new gadget. They require fundamental change in human morality, values, or social structures.
A change in how we behave.
He used the metaphor of a pasture, a commons, open to all herdsmen in a village. Each herdsman rationally thinks, if I add one more animal to my herd, I get all the benefit from selling that animal. The negative consequence, however, the slightly increased grazing pressure on the shared pasture, is spread out among all the herdsmen. So the positive gain for the individual outweighs their small share of the collective harm.
Makes sense from the individual's perspective.
Right. But since every herdsman thinks this way, they all keep adding animals until the pasture is overgrazed and destroyed, bringing ruin to everyone. That's the tragedy. Rational individual self-interest leading to collective disaster when dealing with a shared, limited resource.
And Hardin argued this applies to many environmental problems. Think about pollution. It's often cheaper for a factory to dump waste into a river, the commons, than to pay for expensive treatment. The factory saves money, while the cost of the polluted river is borne by everyone downstream. We end up fouling our own nest.
Or think about national parks, a commons open to all. But if too many people visit, the very beauty and wilderness they came to enjoy gets degraded by crowds, traffic, and erosion. Overfishing in the open ocean is another huge example.
He even applied it controversially to the population problem, arguing that in a world that believes in freedom to breed and provides a welfare state to care for offspring, the commons of global resources gets inevitably strained.
So what's the solution, according to Hardin? He was pretty pessimistic about relying on individual conscience alone. He argued appeals to conscience might work temporarily, but often favor the selfish who ignore the pleas.
He thought it selects against conscience in the long run.
His proposed solution was mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon. Basically, rules, regulations, laws, taxes, things we collectively agree to impose on ourselves to prevent the destruction of the commons, like fishing quotas, pollution taxes, park entrance fees, or limits. We agree to give up some individual freedom to ensure the long-term health of the shared resource.
It really frames that fundamental conflict between individual liberty and the collective good, especially in a crowded world with finite resources. It's a debate that continues constantly in environmental policy.
Wow, okay. That was a seriously deep dive into Unit 1. We went from, observing versus inferring all the way to global cycles and the complexities of managing shared resources. It covers a huge range, from microscopic cellular processes like respiration, right up to these big global environmental challenges. But remember, as you study for your test, the most important stuff often comes right back to these core concepts we've hammered on today: feedback loops, energy flow, the big cycles, ecosystem interactions.
Absolutely. Environmental science is fundamentally about understanding these interconnected systems. Once you grasp those relationships, how matter cycles, how energy flows, how organisms interact with each other and their environment, you really gain a powerful framework. It helps you make sense not just of the textbook, but of the world around you and the complex challenges we collectively face.
Definitely. So here's a final thought to leave you with, maybe something to mull over. What aspects of your own daily life, maybe unknowingly, contribute to some kind of shared commons? Could be local, could be global. And following Hardin's logic, what kind of mutual coercion, whether it's a personal commitment you make, a community agreement, maybe even a broader policy, might be necessary to ensure the long-term health of that commons for everyone? Gives you something to think about.